Now, African countries have often been fairly disadvantaged when it comes to making the most out of their natural resources, in part due to heavily skewed, unfair contracts that they've signed with investors. The Director General of the East African Development Bank, Vivienne Yeda, notes that discovery and ongoing exploration of a whole range of minerals and other natural resources has raised the expectations of host communities and governments that this extraction will then result in wealth creation, much lower fiscal deficits, but also improve the conditions of local people. But more often than not, that's not really been the case. The bank, as a result, has embarked on a program to train lawyers to ensure they can negotiate good contracts that would actually be beneficial to their host countries. Let's explore this in a bit more detail. David Odongo is the acting head of business for Kenya at the East African Development Bank. He joins us now live on the program. David, let's start with a bit of context here. I guess is the fact that there's little expertise in the region around resource deals, is that a direct consequence in part of the fact that a lot of the economies in the region have been based more on agriculture rather than on resource extraction like oil or gold and so on?
Yes, Ramah, that's actually a fact. Our economies have predominantly been agriculture-based. This particular region, East Africa, as you know, was looked at more as an agricultural production site to feed, the colonialist economies. So you're quite right. Our systems previously, our economic base was essentially agriculture-based, and not much attention was paid to investments in the extractive industry sector.
All right, then, so commodities as an industry, it does tend to be fairly opaque. And one example that does come to mind, for example, is Tullow, who say, we've agreed to this particular production sharing agreement, and we're agreeing to, say, spend X amount of money in the community. But then the other party on that contract, like the Kenyan government in this case, says, no, we're not going to make these particular contracts public. Why does that tendency exist in East Africa? What is it that makes the government so hesitant to make this information public?
Thank you, Ramah. That's an interesting question you asked. It's good to be pragmatic in the way one understands public-private partnerships. Always remember there are two parties. There's a public party, there's a private party. The private party is essentially the one coming in with all the investments, the technology, etc. And some of the aspects of that arrangement might be proprietary. It might not be something we want to talk about a lot or we want to hear, but the fact is some of the aspects of the technologies that they're coming on board with, the investment levels, etc., might be proprietary.
But let's just clarify that. Why would that be proprietary information when you could actually make comparative comparisons with, say, we know what the commodity is. It's oil or it's gold or it's platinum, right? And in other countries, you can actually point out to PSAs which are already public. So the tech bit aside, why is the money element of it proprietary?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons basically why we're actually conducting this training. Some of the elements of the contractual arrangements which we are already locked into might not necessarily be necessary, so to say, if there was some negotiating skill behind the arrangements in the first place. So without naming names of certain entities or sectors for that matter, the fact is, as you state, that there are some elements or concessions which we have granted, which are not necessarily well balanced or fair. And one of the aspects of the training which EADB is engaged in is to basically try and address those. What's in the public domain, you'll notice, is that some of these contracts are actually being renegotiated. There are times when the price or the implication of a renegotiation is quite pricey, and you might not actually be able to go in that direction immediately. But I can assure you that there are skills which are being developed to address some of those imbalances in the agreements.
All right, then. With respect to Kenyan law, and I acknowledge the fact that this is a Kenya-specific issue, but we're working under a constitution that essentially guarantees that citizens should have access to information that their government does hold. Given the opacity that we're seeing in some of these, resource-sharing contracts across the board, how do we rebalance the scales in favor of the citizen? Because at the end of the day, these are things that are being done in their authority and it's essentially services that they, as citizens, are paying for?
That's really an excellent question. I think in the context of Kenya, quite a few years of work and effort has gone into trying to address that particular challenge. Specific to Kenya, we at least have a situation where the Public-Private Partnership Act 2021 was passed in December of 2021. And basically this was debated in Parliament in terms of the checks and balances and the expectations in terms of local communities, in terms of the government revenues, community participation in some of these extractive opportunities. So in the context of Kenya, yes, we have come from a historic period where it was quite opaque, but with the passing of this act in December of 2021, we hope that a lot of these issues have been redressed. I will not go so far as saying it is perfect, everything is dynamic, but I think this is an excellent start from the fact that we had a similar legislation in 2013. A lot of debate was conducted, which resulted in the revision in 2021, and hopefully we'll keep on trying to perfect this aspect of our statutes.
All right, just one more question for you on that specific question around the legal talent. The African Legal Support Facility, I know that's an AFTB institution, that's been around since 2005, and originally it was set up to deal with opacity around commercial contracts on debt. But is this an area of expertise, or rather an area in which EADB and the African Legal Support Facility can work together to improve the quality of contracts that are being signed across the continent?
Yes, that's quite correct. Remember, Ramah, that the phenomenon of the extractive industry is relatively new. We don't have the depth of skill or experience, for example, that exists maybe in the Middle East or West Africa. So it is definitely an area that we should or we desire to see additional enhancement of the skills of the indigenous public sector lawyers.
All right, and we'll leave it there for the time being. David Odongo from the East African Development Bank, thank you very much for your time.